everybody, welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be doing a do's and don'ts for realistic hair using coloured pencils. So this is my first in a series of coloured pencils do's and don'ts videos, and so I thought I'd start with hair because it's something that quite a lot of people find really tricky with coloured pencils. So on the left we have got the don't version, and on the right we've got the do version. So I'm going to be giving you some tips on how you can get really realistic looking hair. Also on my Patreon, I have got the real-time version of this with voiceover so that you can follow along with me in real time and you learn some more techniques and tips over on there. So I'll leave a link to that in the description. Also, all of my materials are also listed in the description if you want to check out what exactly I'm using to create these pieces. Anyway guys, let's get on with the tutorial. So the first thing that I'm doing is the don't side, and the first common mistake that beginners make is that when they're doing their initial sketch using graphite, they just do it a bit too dark. And the problem with this is that if you have a dark initial sketch, when you add coloured pencil over the top, especially in the lighter areas, those pencil lines will really show through. So what you want to do is use a kneaded eraser just to lighten up your sketch before you go in and add all of the coloured pencil. Also here I'm starting with an inaccurate sketch, and if you start with an inaccurate sketch then you're going to not set yourself up well to get a realistic drawing. So really try and nail that initial sketch so that you have the best possible chance of getting a realistic drawing. Also, when you're doing coloured pencil, you don't really want to be using a piece of paper that's got a lot of texture to it. So if you want to get really smooth results, it's really hard if you have quite a lot of texture in your paper. So as you can see, when I'm adding the coloured pencil, it's very grainy, and that's because it's on a textured piece of paper. So when it comes to adding the coloured pencil, the first thing that I did kind of wrong was I went in very dark with a pencil straight away, and I did it quite messy. I just drew in all of the individual hairlines rather than looking at kind of the area that needs to be shaded in with the brown. So try not to go in too heavy to start with, just build up those layers slowly. Another thing is that particularly when you're drawing blonde hair isn't yellow, so you don't need to go in with really saturated, vibrant colours. So make sure when you're doing blonde hair you don't go in with a yellow colour. Another mistake that I see people make when they're using coloured pencils is that they use their pencils blunt. And look at this pencil, that is really blunt, but people use them this blunt, and this is not going to get you a smooth result because you can't fill in all of the grain of the paper. It just lays on top and you have the white bit showing through. So make sure you sharpen that pencil before you go in and add the colours. So what I'm doing now is I used a black pencil, and especially when you're doing blonde hair, you don't want to use black for your shadows. It won't mix well with the other yellow tones or cream tones, and especially with blonde hair, there's not really any black in it. I use black when I'm doing really dark hair, but you don't need to do black on blonde hair. And finally, you don't need to outline every clump of hair that you've drawn. So it depends what style you're using, but obviously this video is catered for realistic drawing. So you don't need to outline all of your clumps of hair because in real life, hair is not outlined. So here is a general list of all the don'ts in case you missed some. The final don't that I did was I rubbed my hand across the paper, and this is going to lead to smudging, so try not to do that. But anyway, you can pause it on that list of don'ts if you want to read them even more, but let's get straight on to the do. So I didn't record myself doing the initial sketch because you can't really see it, and that's good because like I said, you want to start with a really light and accurate sketch. So there's many ways that you can get an accurate sketch, like using the grid method or using a tracing or monitor, or even just freehanding it. So make sure you start with an accurate sketch. And what I'm doing now is I'm using that exact same pencil, which was the sepia, and I'm using Caran d'Ache Luminance pencils. So this is like a brown tone. But the difference is I'm not going in with it really hard and really dark. I'm layering it up slowly, and I'm looking and focusing on the direction that the clumps of hair are going in. So like before, I just kind of went in and drew lots of pieces of hair without really thinking about the direction or how they're flowing. But now I'm just focusing on the clumps of hair and rendering each clump rather than just trying to draw in every single strand of hair. I'm also making sure that I start with a sharp pencil before I go in, just to make sure that I'm getting into all the white grain and I can get a really smooth finish. And the difference here is also that I'm using a smoother paper. So before I was using more of a textured paper, and here I am using Bristol paper by Strathmore, and it's the plate surface paper. But again, that's all listed in the description. And this is really, really smooth, so you can get really smooth results, which is really hard to do if you've got really textured paper, especially if you're doing stuff like skin. So I'm still just going through with that brown tone, and I'm just using it to establish all of the shadows. So I do like to establish my shadows first, so that it's easier to judge all of the other values and how light or dark they need to be. But once I've done that, I'm going in with a colour called raw umber, and lots of colour pencil sets have this type of colour. And as you can see, I didn't go in with a yellow colour. A lot of the colours that you use are quite muted, like cream tones, or raw umber is a really great base for blonde hair. I use it loads when I'm drawing blonde hair. So I'm just going to go and add that throughout the whole of the hair just as a base. It's quite light and you don't need to press hard. So when you're doing hair or portraits, it's really important that you layer up lightly rather than going in and burnishing straight away. If you burnish straight away, it's hard to add layers on top and get that smooth kind of finish. It gets quite a streaky finish. So I'm just very lightly building up the layers. If you need to go darker, don't press harder on that pencil, just switch to a darker version of that colour. So like this is the raw umber 10%, but if you needed to go darker but stick within that same sort of colour range, then you could just go to the raw umber like 50%. So now I'm trying to get the colour more accurate, so I'm going in with the brown ochre 10%, which is very much like a creamy brown sort of colour, but it's very light and it makes a really nice blonde tone. It's more natural. If you're struggling to find what colours you need to do the hair, then I recommend getting your reference photo, which you should use by the way. Always try and use a reference photo, especially if you're doing realism, and import your reference photo into something like Paint, and then just use the little eyedropper tool and select different areas of the hair, and this will give you more kind of accurate selection of the colours that you need, and you can just go in with your colour pencil set and match those colours as closely as you can. So now I'm going in with that raw umber 50%, which is the darker version, and I'm just using this to add some more of the shadows. And two things here is that you can really tell that I'm taking more time doing this. The other one took me like 5-10 minutes, maybe, not even 10 minutes, but this one took me like 2 hours, which is a significant difference. And I wouldn't be able to get this level of realism in anything like less than an hour. Even an hour is way too short. I'd never do piece of hair like this in an hour. It always takes me about 2 hours because that's how long I need to layer and do all of the shading, all of the colours. It's just how long it takes. If you want to do realism, you've just got to be prepared to spend that time to build up the layers. If you rush it, then you are going to get really bad results really. So I'm just building up with that raw umber. Still not applying lots of pressure, and I'm still making sure that I'm using a really, really sharp pencil, so that I don't get really fuzzy pencil marks, which is what you get if you have blunt pencils. It just becomes really fuzzy on the edges, so you don't get like strong and crisp lines. And I'm just using that to shade. Another thing that you'll notice is I'm not going back and forth with the pencil. I'm just kind of flowing it with the direction that the hair is going in. And I'm slowly transitioning up to where that highlighted area is, like in the top right hand corner. But I'm just going really, really lightly. We will build up to the darker tones, but I just like to do it slowly. And the more layers you have, the more sort of depth your drawing has. And that's what gives it that realistic look. It looks like lots of layers of individual hairs. So now that I've basically got everything established, I know where the highlighted areas are because I didn't really add any shadow tones on them. And I've got everything sort of saturated with colour pencil. I'm now going to go and render it a bit more, smooth everything out and just make it look more realistic. So I'm going back in with that brown. Like I said, I'm not using black for blonde hair. It doesn't need it. It doesn't get that dark. And I'm just going in with this dark brown just to add in the darkest shadows, which tended to be the bits of hair like that were next to her face, because obviously that covers up, that piece of hair is like covered up. So I'm just going in with a bit more pressure. You can use more pressure as you build up the layers. In fact, you need to do that to blend it all together, especially with wax-based pencils. Like, even if you don't have these pencils, you can still get this result with Prismacolors. That's what I used to use, and you can get similar results because they are creamy as well. If you use the Faber-Castell polychromos, then you can't really blend in the same way, but you can still get amazing looking hair with the polychromos, because I've also used them as well. You just need to kind of change your technique a bit for them because they aren't like wax based. So now I'm going in with the brown ochre, and I'm using the brown ochre just to add a bit more saturation. So in the reference photo, a few areas had a bit more saturation and some areas were a bit warmer as well. So I'm just going in and I'm adding more saturation, and I'm just layering more colours and just to get the colour really accurate. Again, brown ochre is something that's in quite a lot of the coloured pencil sets. It's quite a generic tone, and so you should be able to get this or something like this in your coloured pencil sets. And this is a great colour again for blonde hair. And as you add more and more layers, they will naturally start to blend together to get a really smooth result, especially with this brand. As you layer, they kind of blend together, the pigment blends, and you get that nice finish without having to like work really hard to burnish and push down on the pencil. You shouldn't really need to until you get to like the final layer where you can like smooth everything out. But even now I still have some grain showing through, but I'd like to get all my colours down and then take care of that towards the end. So again, I'm building up some more shadows. As I get towards the final layers, I just kind of tweak things as I see them. So if I see areas that need to be a bit darker, I'll go in with some darker colours like the sepia, the dark brown, to just kind of tweak things until they are at the level that I want them to be at. For realism, contrast is so important. You need to have your darks dark enough and your highlights bright enough, because that's what's going to give it depth, make it look three-dimensional and really pop out the page. So the important things are having a good contrast and then obviously having the detail. Especially with realism, detail is really important. So I'm just blending it out a bit with the raw umber 10% in the lighter areas, pressing a bit harder just to kind of fill in all of the white grain and smooth everything out. And on the shadowed areas, now I'm using the raw umber 50% just to smooth those areas out. So I don't use the same colour to blend all over. I'll use darker colour to blend out the shadows and a lighter colour for the mid and highlighted areas. Now I'm just adding some more shadow and softening out that piece of hair down there with the brown ochre 10% as well, which is basically like a cream sort of tone. You can go back in with lots of different colours and glaze them over the top until you get a colour that you're happy with. I recommend testing the colours that you think you want to use first to see how they work together, whether you get the result that you want. Especially if you swatch the colours first, then test out a few colours to see what is the closest match to that. Just like do a little test piece of hair, just like a little lock of hair, do your technique, and then you can apply it to the whole of the head of hair. So again, going in with that brown ochre, just keep layering until you get the saturation level that you want. What I like about this paper is that even though it's smooth, you can still get lots of layers. A lot of smooth paper is hard to get layers on, but this one, I really like it. I used the 500 series for this, but you don't need that one. You can get the 300 or 400 series, which is slightly cheaper, but will still have the same sort of finish because they're all plate and smooth surface anyway. So what I'm basically doing is getting the foundation established. So all of the colours are going to be established, and then I'll go in and add all of the details with like a little X-Acto crafting knife. And I really like this technique to pull up lots of individual hairs, which I'll show you in a bit. Now I'm just going in with the raw umber, which is the darkest of the raw umbers, and I'm just using it to add some of those more subtle shadows on that piece of hair down there. But we're nearly finished with this bit of hair, and we're going to go in and add all of the little details. So finally what I'm doing is I'm going in with the buff titanium or white, you can use white as well, and I'm just using it with a bit of pressure just to pull up some highlights and lighten up certain clumps of hair and just little strands here and there, just to create more contrast and just lighten up some of the strands of hair. So now I'm going to go in and add all of the little details like I was saying earlier, and this is the little crafting knife that I'll be using. You can get them really cheap off like Amazon, and what I like to do is just use it and I just scrape it down to pull up some of the wax. So how it works is it basically scrapes off the wax layers, which means that you're revealing a lighter colour and lighter layers that you were doing. And so this gives the nice impression of some really light hairs and just adding details. So I love this technique for stuff like hair or stubble or any little details that you want to make lighter. And as you can see, it works really well at getting some extra details on flyaway hairs. I love using it for flyaway hairs because it's hard to get flyaway hairs with like a white coloured pencil, but this makes it just super easy, and it will take a bit of practice to get used to because you need to make sure that you don't rip the paper. So definitely just don't go straight in on your like final piece and do this. Test it on a scrap piece of paper first, but it is quite an easy technique to do. You just need to get to grips with how to hold the knife, what angle to hold it at, and also just basically how hard you need to use it. I'm just going to do a few of them throughout all of the hair. It helps just break up the clumps of hair as well and stop it looking so uniformed. But on the reference photo, she did have a lot of little flyaway hairs overlapping everywhere. So it's the little details like this which really takes it to that next level of realism. Just really focusing on all of the little details. So once you have done that step with the crafting knife, it does make it harder to go on top with your coloured pencils. So this is really something that you want to do for your last step. But anyway guys, that is it for today's tutorial. Remember to subscribe if you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to see my other ones that are coming up in this sort of style of video, as I have new tutorials every single week and fun art videos as well. Also, if you guys over on my Patreon, I've got this one and the other ones are coming soon with the eye, nose, and there's also lots of other coloured pencil tutorials on there as well, so make sure you check that out. Anyway guys, thank you for watching and I will see you next time. Bye everyone!